When I applied, the idea of working the Halloween season at Party City seemed like a great time. You've got costumes, decorations, and the excited chaos of people preparing for one of the most fun holidays of the year. I'd even volunteered for the night shift in October, thinking the store would be quieter after dark, leaving me to stock shelves, organize costumes, and occasionally help a few last-minute shoppers. What I didn't expect, though, was for that shift to turn into something out of a horror movie. It was October 2016, a week before Halloween, and the store was in full swing. We were slammed with customers rushing to get costumes, and the chaos didn't slow down until we were about an hour from closing. I was working with Sarah and Josh that night, along with a few others in the front of the store. My job was to handle the back stock, which meant frequent trips down to the basement, grabbing extra costumes, decorations, and anything else we needed to restock the shelves. Now, Party City's basement wasn't anything special, just a large, damp room filled with old racks, boxes, and those giant Halloween decorations that didn't sell the previous year. It was a little creepy, sure, but I didn't mind. It gave the place some character, right? Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. The shift was going smoothly until around 9 p.m. when I made my third or fourth trip down to the basement. I was grabbing a few boxes of fake cobwebs and plastic spiders when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, probably the way the light was hitting one of the Halloween decorations, but when I looked directly at it, my stomach dropped a bit. There was someone standing at the far end of the basement near the old storage racks, a figure in a long, white hooded robe wearing a mask that covered their face completely. The mask was smooth and featureless, just a blank white face staring back at me. My first thought was that it was Josh messing with me. He was the type to pull pranks, especially around Halloween. So I called out, "Nice try, Josh, you're not scaring me." No response. The figure just stood there, perfectly still. I laughed it off, thinking he was committed to the bit. I grabbed my boxes and started walking toward the stairs, looking back at the figure every few steps. He hadn't moved. In fact, the longer I stared, the more I realized something was off. The robe wasn't one of ours, and the mask, it wasn't one of the cheap plastic ones we sold. It was too detailed, too lifelike in its blankness. I stopped halfway to the stairs and turned fully toward the figure. "Okay, seriously, Josh, it's late. Let's not do this." Still nothing, just silence. Now I was starting to get annoyed. I had stuff to do, and this prank was getting old fast. I set the boxes down and took a step toward the figure, ready to pull the mask off and end the joke. But as soon as I moved, the figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing behind one of the storage racks. That's when I hesitated. If it was Josh, he would have said something by now, or at least laughed. But there was no sound. Just the faint hum of the overhead lights. "Josh?" I called out again. I walked slowly toward the spot where the figure had vanished. I could feel the hairs on my neck standing up. As I reached the storage rack, I peered around the corner, fully expecting to see Josh crouched down, trying to spook me. But there was no one there, just the dusty old boxes and Halloween decorations from last year. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe Josh had slipped out when I wasn't looking, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned to head back to the stairs, but as soon as I did, the figure was back, standing in the same spot as before, right in front of the old storage racks. Only this time they were closer, much closer. They hadn't made a sound. No footsteps, no rustling of the robe, just silence. My mouth went dry. This wasn't Josh. This wasn't anyone I knew. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaky now. Still no answer. The figure didn't move. I slowly backed toward the stairs, my eyes locked on the figure. Every step I took, I expected them to rush at me, to do something. But they just stood there, watching, or at least I assumed they were watching. The mask made it impossible to tell if there were even eyes behind it. When I reached the stairs, I grabbed the handrail and bolted up 2 steps at a time, slamming the door shut behind me. I just wanted to get back to the front of the store where the lights were brighter and other people were around. Sarah was behind the counter restocking some candy, and she looked up as I rushed toward her. "You okay?" she asked. "Did anyone come down to the basement?" I blurted out, my voice probably more panicked than I wanted it to be. "No, why?" I opened my mouth to explain, but I didn't even know where to start. Telling her that there was a hooded figure in a mask standing silently in the basement sounded insane, even to me. "Never mind," I muttered, trying to brush it off. "It's probably just Josh messing around." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Josh left an hour ago." My heart sank. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she'd just said. If Josh wasn't here, then who or what had I seen in the basement? Before I could say anything else, I heard a faint creak, the sound of a door opening. We both turned toward the basement stairwell at the same time. The door, the one I had just slammed shut, was now slightly ajar. "I locked that," I whispered, more to myself than to Sarah. Sarah's eyes widened and she took a step back, her hand reaching for her phone. "What the hell is going on?" The basement door creaked open a little wider, and then I saw it. The figure, standing halfway up the stairs, the mask or face, I still couldn't tell which, seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. It didn't move, it just stood there, watching us, silent, unmoving. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her back behind the counter. "Call the cops," I whispered. She nodded, fumbling with her phone. But before she could dial, the figure slowly stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the basement once again. The door creaked shut behind it. We stood there in stunned silence, neither of us knowing what to do next. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah finally spoke. "What was that?" "I don't know, but I'm not going back down there." We waited for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. Finally, our store manager Greg showed up to check on us. We told him what happened, but he just laughed it off. "It's probably one of those teenagers trying to mess with you guys," he said, shaking his head. But Sarah and I knew better. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't something we could explain away. There was someone or something in the basement that shouldn't have been there. Greg eventually called the police just to be safe. 2 officers showed up, checked the basement, and found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone else had been there. They chalked it up to a Halloween prank gone too far. I quit the next day. Sarah lasted another week before she bailed too. Neither of us wanted to stick around to see what else might happen. I still don't know who or what I saw in that basement, but I'll never forget the way it watched us without saying a word. And every October, when the air starts to get a little colder and the Halloween decorations go up, I can't help but think about that night, about the figure in the white robe, and about how it never made a sound. Growing up in a small town, there wasn't much to do, especially once the weather turned colder. But every October, a massive pile of leaves would magically appear in old Mr. Keller's front yard, and it became the center of our fall afternoons. That pile, made up of crisp, fallen leaves from the giant maples that lined the street, was our playground. As long as we didn't ruin the rest of his yard, old Keller never said a word about it. We'd see him sometimes just standing in the window, watching us silently from behind those dusty curtains. At the time, it didn't seem strange at all. There were 4 of us who practically lived in that pile. Me, Tommy, Ryan, and Jess. We weren't little kids anymore, we were in middle school, but there was something about that leaf pile that brought us back to simpler times. After all, in our small town, the simple things were the best things, and it seemed like nothing could ruin that. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the air had a bite to it, the way it always does as fall creeps closer to winter. We had just finished a game of street football, and our jerseys were sticking to us with sweat. There it was, the giant mound of leaves just waiting for us to dive in. Mr. Keller must have raked all morning to get it that big. It stood taller than some of us, like a colorful mountain of autumn. "Last one in's a loser," Tommy yelled, already sprinting for the pile. Without thinking, we all took off, running full speed into the leaves. The pile exploded in every direction, leaves raining down like confetti. We dove in, tossing handfuls at each other, laughing until we couldn't breathe. It was like being little kids again, rolling around without a care in the world. We buried each other in the leaves, disappearing under the colorful blanket, then leaping out like monsters, roaring and tackling one another. This went on for nearly an hour until we were all completely exhausted. As the sun began to set, the laughter died down and we lay in the leaves, catching our breath. It was the kind of peaceful, quiet moment that only comes after hours of carefree fun. That was when I first noticed it. A soft rustling sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the pile. I sat up and looked around. Jess was lying back, staring up at the sky with her arms outstretched, and Tommy was poking at Ryan with a stick, trying to start another fight. "You hear that?" I asked, looking at Jess. "Hear what?" "That noise." I pointed toward the pile of leaves. "Like something's moving in there," Tommy chuckled. "It's probably just a squirrel or something. Stop freaking out." I wasn't convinced. The rustling was getting louder, and it was definitely coming from the pile, right from the center. Jess squinted at the leaves, concerned. "Yeah, I hear it too now." Ryan stood up. "Dude, it's just leaves. You're being paranoid." But the rustling didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. And then, to my horror, the pile actually moved. It wasn't a small shift like when a breeze catches the edge of it. No, this was more like something underneath was trying to push up through the leaves. The mound of color shifted and swayed like it was breathing. My stomach clenched, and my mind immediately raced to the worst possible conclusion. "Okay, what the hell?" Tommy finally muttered, standing up. Ryan still looked unconvinced, but even he took a step back, keeping his eyes locked on the pile. "I'm telling you, there's something in there," I said, stepping backward, away from the rustling leaves. Jess had already moved behind me. Tommy walked over to the pile and nudged it with his foot. Nothing happened at first, just a little flutter of leaves as they settled back down. But then, the pile erupted. Leaves scattered in all directions as something burst out from underneath. We screamed, all four of us. A man stood there, hunched over, his clothes filthy and torn. His hair was matted with leaves, and his face was smeared with dirt. His eyes were wide and wild, darting between us as if he wasn't sure what he was seeing, or maybe he didn't care. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was like we were frozen in place, staring at this thing that had just emerged from our leaf pile. Then the man spoke. "I've been watching you." That's when I ran. I didn't stop to think. I didn't even look back. I just ran, sprinting down the street. I could hear Jess's footsteps right behind me. But Tommy stayed. I heard him shout something, his voice full of anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled, but I didn't dare turn around. Ryan was the next to run, and by the time we reached the end of the block, he was right behind us. Jess was sobbing, clutching at her sides, and I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. We huddled together, catching our breath, too afraid to say anything. Finally, I mustered up the courage to look back at Keller's yard. Tommy was still there, standing in the leaves, face to face with the man. "What's he doing?" Ryan whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know. He's just talking to him." "Talking? We have to get him out of there." But before any of us could move, the man took a step closer to Tommy, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in Tommy's body, the way his fists clenched at his sides. And then, without warning, the man laughed. He straightened up and turned his back on Tommy, walking slowly toward the edge of the yard. For a brief moment, it seemed like everything was over, that this nightmare was just some twisted prank. But then, just as the man reached the bushes at the edge of Keller's yard, he stopped. He turned around, his eyes locking onto us from across the street. "I'll be seeing you." With that, he disappeared into the bushes, leaving the four of us standing there, trembling and confused. Tommy walked over to us. "He's gone," he said simply. "What did he say to you?" Jess asked. Tommy shrugged, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the man had disappeared. "Nothing important. He's just some weirdo." But there was something in Tommy's voice, something that made me think he wasn't telling us the whole truth. I didn't push it, though. None of us did. We were just glad to be away from that man. We spent the rest of the afternoon at my house, trying to make sense of what had happened. Ryan suggested we call the cops, but Tommy shot that down immediately. What are we going to tell them, that a crazy guy popped out of a leaf pile? They'll laugh us off the phone. Jess nodded, still shaken. "I just want to forget about it." So that's what we did. We didn't talk about it again, not for the rest of the weekend, and not in the weeks that followed. But something had changed after that day. We stopped playing in the leaves, stopped going near Keller's yard altogether. We found other things to do, other places to hang out, But every time I walked past Mr. Keller's house, I couldn't help but look at the pile of leaves, thinking I'd see that man again, hiding beneath the surface, waiting. He never came back, not that we saw anyway. Who was he, why was he there, and most importantly, what was he planning to do? The memory of that day still haunts me, even now. It started like any other fall date, one of those perfect autumn afternoons where everything felt crisp, golden, and endless. Nikki, my girlfriend, had found this old apple orchard online, tucked away in the countryside, far enough from the city that it felt like we'd be in our own little world for a few hours. It was the kind of place that didn't make it onto brochures or websites. No fancy apple-picking baskets or cider tastings, just row upon row of trees and a dirt path leading into the woods. We left late in the afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting this beautiful orange light across the fields as we drove. Nikki had her feet up on the dashboard, her sweater pulled over her hands as she scrolled through her phone, reading out random facts about apples. It was cute, typical Nikki, always finding something small to dive into, even on a simple date. "Did you know there are over 7,500 different types of apples?" she asked, her face lighting up. "That many, huh? Looks like we'll be busy." She laughed, and we continued our drive through the winding country roads. I wasn't a huge apple-picking fan, but it felt like a nice way to spend time together, away from the noise of the city. Plus, the thought of biting into a freshly picked apple didn't sound too bad. As we got closer to the orchard, the scenery started to change. The landscape became more remote. Fewer houses, fewer signs of life. The road narrowed into a bumpy dirt path. It was quiet, almost eerily so. The kind of quiet where you could hear the wind moving through the branches. I looked at Nikki, who was still scrolling through her phone, oblivious to how isolated we were getting. The old wooden sign for the orchard appeared suddenly at a bend in the road. Whitaker's Orchard, Est 1957, it read, though most of the paint had faded and the wood was splintering from age. Beneath the sign, a smaller one dangled loosely, as if it had been hastily nailed up years ago. Closed for the season. I pulled up beside the sign, turning off the engine. "I didn't see anything online about it being closed," Nikki said. "It doesn't look like anyone's been here for a while." The orchard looked abandoned, rows of apple trees stretching out into the distance, their branches weighed down with fruit, but no cars, no people, and no signs of recent activity. "Looks like we have the place to ourselves," I said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "I guess it couldn't hurt to look around. We came all this way," she said. We hopped the low wooden fence that separated the road from the orchard. The ground was soft underfoot, covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves that crunched with each step. The trees towered over us. "Let's grab a couple of apples and head back," Nikki suggested. She wasn't nervous. Nikki was never the nervous type, but there was an edge to her tone that I couldn't quite place. Then we started walking further into the orchard, leaving the fence and the road behind. The apples were everywhere, more than we could possibly pick in a single trip. Some were on the ground, others hanging low on the branches, ripe and ready to be plucked. Nikki picked one from a nearby tree and tossed it to me. I bit into it with a satisfying crunch. "Not bad," I mumbled with my mouth full. "Pretty good, actually." Nikki smiled and grabbed her own apple, taking a bite as we continued deeper into the orchard. But as we walked, there was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. The wind had died down, and the only sound was our footsteps crunching through the leaves. I turned to Nikki. "You ever get that feeling like, I don't know, like you're not alone?" "What? Like someone's watching us?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's just being out here in the middle of nowhere. Feels weird, doesn't it?" She paused, scanning the rows of trees ahead of us. "Yeah, it's a little eerie, but it's probably just because the place is so empty." We kept walking, picking a few more apples as we went, but the feeling of being watched was growing stronger. I looked over my shoulder more than once, convinced I'd catch someone lurking in the shadows between the trees. But there was never anything there, just the rows of trees, standing still and silent. It wasn't until we reached the far edge of the orchard that things started to get really strange. Nikki had wandered off a few rows ahead of me, her hands full of apples. I stayed behind, squatting down to grab one that had fallen into the leaves when I heard a soft crunch behind me. At first, I thought it was Nikki, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I stood up slowly, scanning the trees. The orchard was still silent. All I could hear were the distant bird calls from the woods beyond. But then I heard it again, another crunch. This time, closer. It was the sound of footsteps. "Nikki?" I called, turning in the direction she had gone. I walked a few paces, calling her name again, louder this time. "Nikki?" Still nothing. Just the sound of footsteps, moving faster now. Panic started to set in as I realized those footsteps weren't mine. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there, moving through the trees. I spun around, scanning the trees frantically, and that's when I saw him. A man. Standing just a few rows over, he stood still, just watching, partially hidden between the trees. I couldn't make out his face, but there was something off about the way he was standing there, watching us. "Nikki!" I yelled, louder this time, my voice echoing through the quiet orchard. "We need to go now." She stepped out from behind the trees a few moments later, looking confused. "What's going on?" "There's someone here," I said, trying to stay calm but feeling the tension rise inside me. "He's just standing there." I pointed in the direction where I'd seen the man, his shadowy figure barely visible among the trees. Nikki squinted, trying to make him out. Before she could say anything, the man stepped forward, his hands raised as if to show he wasn't a threat. His face came into view, and he smiled, a disarming smile like he was just another friendly face out for a stroll. "Hey, sorry if I scared you too. Didn't mean to sneak up on you." The guy didn't look dangerous, just some dude in a flannel shirt and jeans, hands in his pockets, walking slowly toward us. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my distance. He smiled again. "Oh, just a local. I come by here sometimes to clear my head, you know? It's peaceful out here. Saw you two and thought I'd say hi." There was something off about the way he looked at Nikki, though. His eyes lingered on her a little too long, his smile holding for just a second too much. "We were just leaving," I said quickly, moving to stand closer to Nikki. "Place is closed for the season." The man chuckled, like I'd said something amusing. "Yeah, it's closed all right, been closed for years." His eyes never leaving Nikki now. "You two from around here?" "No," Nikki answered before I could stop her. "Just visiting." The man nodded, stepping even closer. "That's nice. It's good to have visitors. Makes things more interesting around here." There was something in his tone now, an edge that hadn't been there before. Nikki seemed to pick up on it too, and she moved a little closer to me, her arms crossed over her chest. "What do you want?" I asked. The man's smile faltered for the briefest moment before it returned, though now it felt more like a mask than a genuine expression. "Nothing, really. Just thought you might need a hand getting out of here." His eyes darted to Nikki again. "Or maybe she needs help?" I stepped in front of Nikki instinctively. "We're fine. Thanks." The man didn't back off, though. He just stood there, smiling, his hands still tucked in his pockets as if he had all the time in the world. "Tell you what," he said, taking a slow step toward us. "Why don't I walk you guys to your car? It's easy to get lost out here at night." I tightened my grip on Nikki's hand. "We know the way." The smile faded from the man's face entirely now. "You sure about that?" Nikki tugged at my sleeve. "Let's just go," she whispered. We started to walk, moving quickly toward the fence, but the man didn't follow right away. He just stood there watching us with that same unsettling smile, like he was enjoying a game that only he knew the rules to. I looked over my shoulder, and that's when I saw him start to move again, slowly following us. "Hey," I shouted, spinning around. "What do you want?" The man stopped, his smile twisting into something more sinister. "I told you. I just thought she might need some help." Nikki's grip tightened on my arm. "Let's go." We turned and started walking faster, practically jogging toward the fence, but the footsteps behind us picked up too. He wasn't done yet. I could hear the crunch of leaves under his boots. I turned again and saw him break into a jog, heading straight for Nikki. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Nikki's hand and pulling her toward the fence. We sprinted through the rows of trees, the branches scratching at our arms as we ran. The man was close, too close, and I could hear his breath now as he gained on us. We reached the fence, and Nikki scrambled over it, her hands shaking as she landed on the other side. I followed quickly, but the man was right behind us, his hand reaching out as if he was about to grab her. I didn't think, I just reacted. I turned and kicked at the fence, slamming the wooden boards against him, knocking him back just long enough for us to get to the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling as I unlocked the doors. Nikki jumped in and I followed, slamming the doors shut just as the man reached the fence again. He didn't try to climb over this time. He just stood there with a cold, empty stare. His eyes locked on Nikki as I jammed the key into the ignition and floored the gas pedal. We sped away. He didn't chase us this time. He didn't need to. The damage had been done. It wasn't until we were miles away back on the main road that Nikki finally whispered, "Do you think he wanted to take me?" I didn't know how to answer, because I knew that's what he wanted. We reported the incident to the local police, but nothing really ever happened. Still, we're just glad we escaped unharmed. I left the party later than I had planned. It was one of those Halloween get-togethers where everyone was supposed to dress up, eat candy, and maybe have a couple of drinks. I didn't put much effort into my costume, just a black hoodie, some face paint, and I called it a night. It wasn't my scene anyway, but I had promised a friend I'd show up. That promise kept me there long enough to see most people leave, but by 1 a.m., I decided I'd had enough. It had been raining on and off the entire night, and by the time I stepped out of the house, the drizzle had turned into a steady downpour. My car was parked a couple of blocks away, so I jogged down the slick pavement. The road was quiet, too quiet for Halloween. No trick-or-treaters, no late-night walkers. Just me, and the sound of my sneakers splashing through the puddles. Once I got to my car, I sat there for a moment, letting the sound of the rain against the windshield relax me. It felt good to be alone, away from the noise and costumes. The thought of a warm bed was the only thing keeping me going at that point. I turned on the engine, flipped the windshield wipers on, and pulled out onto the empty road. It was a long drive home. The rain made it harder to see, even with the wipers working overtime. I was about 15 minutes from home when I saw her. At first, it was just a faint figure on the side of the road, barely visible through the rain. My headlights caught the edge of something. I slowed down, squinting through the water-smeared windshield, and there she was. A girl walking along the side of the road, no umbrella, soaked to the bone. She wasn't wearing anything that made sense for the weather. A light, pale dress clung to her frame, and her long, dark hair hung in damp strands over her face. It wasn't just the fact that she was out in the middle of nowhere in the rain that made me uneasy. It was the way she walked, slowly, like she wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. Instinct kicked in. I pulled over. I lowered my window just a crack, enough for my voice to get out. "Hey, are you all right?" She stopped, turning toward me. Her face was shadowed by the rain and the angle of the headlights, but I could see her hesitate. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound reassuring. The rain was coming down harder now, and the thought of leaving her out there alone didn't sit right with me. There was a long pause before she finally nodded. I unlocked the door and she slipped into the passenger seat without a word. The smell of rain filled the car as she sat down, dripping water onto the seat. I looked at her out of the corner of my eye. She was staring straight ahead, hands resting in her lap, fingers pale and slender. "Where are you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. She was quiet for a moment, almost like she hadn't heard me. Then, in a voice so soft I could barely make it out, she said, "Just up the road." That answer didn't quite feel right, but I kept driving. "All right, I'll drop you off wherever you need." We drove in silence after that. I kept sneaking glances at her, trying to make sense of her. The dim light inside the car didn't help, but there was something unsettling about her presence. Her dress was odd for the weather, completely impractical, and her hair, matted and wet, looked like it hadn't been washed in days. And her stillness got to me. She barely moved, her head tilted slightly down like she was lost in thought. After a few minutes, I broke the silence again. "Were you coming from a party or something?" I didn't expect to see anyone walking around out here this late. She didn't respond right away, and when she did, it was almost like she wasn't answering the question at all. "I've been walking for a while." That was it. nothing more. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I decided to drop it. If she wanted to keep quiet, I wasn't going to push her. We drove for another few minutes, and the rain seemed to get worse. My headlights barely cut through the downpour now, and the road felt even more isolated. No houses, no signs, just dark trees pressing in on both sides. "Is it much farther?" I asked, trying to shake the growing unease gnawing at me. She lifted her head slightly, finally turning to look at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide but distant, like she was looking through me rather than at me. "Just keep going," she whispered. The rain beat down harder, and I could barely see the road ahead. I flicked on the high beams, hoping for better visibility, but then I saw it. Up ahead, at the end of the road, was a cemetery. The sight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't driven this way in years and had forgotten all about it, but there it was, the old cemetery, its rusted gate barely visible through the rain. My skin prickled. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I slowed the car, bringing it to a stop just outside the gate. I turned to her, unsure of what to say. "Are you visiting someone here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the door handle and stepped out of the car, disappearing into the downpour before I could react. I watched her walk toward the gate, her figure dissolving into the mist and rain until she was completely gone. For a moment, I just sat there, staring after her, wondering if I should follow, but something told me not to. Something deep inside whispered that I didn't want to know what she was doing out here, that I shouldn't get involved. After a long moment, I put the car in reverse, turned around and headed back down the road, away from the cemetery. The rain let up slightly as I drove, and the unease began to fade, at least until I looked over at the passenger seat. It was dry, completely dry. I tried to make sense of it. There had been no trace of her, no wet seat, no water dripping onto the floor. Nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. I kept driving. My thoughts were racing. Who was she? Why was she out there, walking toward the cemetery in the middle of the night? And more importantly, was she even real? The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and empty. But in the back of my mind, I knew something about that night wasn't right, and it would stay with me long after the rain stopped. If these stories creeped you out, hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories. Got your own spooky encounter? Share it in the comments. I want to hear every creepy detail. Don't forget to share this video with friends who love a good scare. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.